911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Pat Turner from Squatch Talk. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate being here. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since you brought this story to my attention. We're going to be talking about Kelly and Stinky today. And before we get started with that, obviously, I want people who may not be familiar with you and your channel to talk a little bit about you, who you are, and your channel. And then let's move into this Kelly story, which is really fascinating. I can't wait to share it with the audience.
Well, yeah, man. It's pretty simple. I've been sort of intrigued by the Bigfoot phenomena for a couple of decades now, and decided to just jump in and swim the waters. And what I feel like I bring to the table is just a good, reasonable discussions about it, and some kind of forward thinking for a plan to observe, learn more, and really move the ball down the field. So my channel is just all about discussions and surrounding Bigfoot that are grounded in reality.
You definitely keep it real. I've been a guest over there a couple of times. You've been on the show a couple of times. And it's one of the things I appreciate you is you don't pull punches and you keep it real. And I think that's really missing in the Bigfoot phenomenon and in the Bigfoot community, in my personal opinion. And this story is sort of one of those times where I know when you first heard the story, and we'll get into that in just a second. But before we actually hear from Kelly in his own words, Kelly's since passed away since you recorded these things that we're about to hear of him telling his story. Why don't you sort of set the table for us and tell the audience and me how you met Kelly, how you got involved in the story, and how this all unfolded for you?
Yeah, sure, man. And yes, unfortunately, Kelly did pass away about 2.5 years ago. And I had gotten to know him pretty well. We were buds. And he dug my old bands that I used to play in, and Kelly was an interesting guy. He was a little special, I'll just say. Not in any serious way. He was a very functional guy. But yeah, I just happened to meet him on a different show that I was a part of one night, and he just kind of jumped into my life with this crazy story. And it's funny watching it, going back and watching some of these clips, which if you wanted to link the original video to see Kelly more, but I just kind of lit up like a Christmas tree because he was just touching on so many interesting points to me. Because another part of this is that years ago, me and my buddy Ernie, we did some sketches for Eyewitness Who Saw a Juvenile. And so when I started asking Kelly to describe this juvenile that he had been hanging around, let's just say, he was hitting on some key features that were in our drawings. And yeah, that blew me away, man. So I got sucked into his story pretty quick. And it's fascinating. It's a little bit, some people think it's a little over the top or a little bit out there, but I'll let you decide. You, the audience, can decide. But it is a fascinating story.
Well, let's get right to it. Let's just play this out. It's about 22 minutes of Kelly. I've put these clips together from what you sent me over, and it's Kelly telling his own story in his own words. And let's listen to Kelly talk, and then you and I'll come back together and we'll kind of talk about what we hear.
Well, when I was a little boy growing up here in Durham, North Carolina, on toward Hillsborough, Orange County line, my grandmother and grandfather used to have the old farm over there, Crosdale Farms, and my granddad used to always warn me about going in the woods or the wild man would get me. He used to tell me there was a wild hairy man in the woods, and I used to just cop it off as, he was just, giving me a fable or, just trying to scare me. And he used to tell me tales about when he was a kid, when him and my grandmother were young, a little church out there by the swamp. There was this, at nighttime, there'd be these real loud screams and howls coming from the woods in the swamp. And on 2 occasions, 2 little kids got carried off. So they organized a honey port and said they, shot whatever it was. But my first Bigfoot encounter was when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And the county part of Durham from here, probably like, I'm downtown area now, south side, and it's probably like 30 minutes from where I live now. That Cook Road area, and I was at the junkyard, That's where I lived by the railroad tracks and the power lines. And there was an old junkyard, and as a kid, I used to walk all through the fields and catch grasshoppers and ants and stuff, and I was very much into nature, ant farms and stuff, and I came across it. First, I thought he was, a wild kid or something, a little boy. He was taller than me, probably like you know, and more big up here than he looked like he didn't have no neck. But he was so slender, and his hands was like this, you know, came down like an 8 bar, I guess you could say.
Wow.
Shocker from the land of lost.
So his head was way bigger than it should have been for his body size.
Yeah.
Okay.
And his feet was real bad, and the nose on it was like kind of wide, like this, you know. But kind of still had that little right here.
Yeah, was it wide and flat?
Did he have
A little ridge on his nose.
little ridges right here?
Yeah. Almost like a Klingon, like you could say, little on his nose up here.
Okay. That's really interesting, man. I'm going to send you some, I'll send them to Daniel. He can send you some drawings that I have of Juvenile, and I'd love to see if it matches up with what you saw.
Yeah, the one I seen last year was like Chewbacca, man. It was like this, but it was more bigger, and it was like I guess you say the epidermal or whatever. It was almost like it was padding, you know. It was real thick, and I don't even walk around. I was always asking my best for it, you know. We had, you know, I thought he had ugly boots. I'm like, he's covered with hair, you know, and he just sit there looking, you know. It was like having, you know, it was like in a movie, man. That's all I could say. It was like having Chewbacca as my friend, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just feel like you didn't know any better because you were a kid?
Yeah, I didn't. I thought he was like mentally retarded wild kid that somebody had just, you know, he was living by himself, ran away from home. I don't know. But I used to wonder why he looked like he did, and the hair was just hanging over his face, and hair was all over, except for inside of his hands right here. It was hair just long, like fur, all over. And the top of his head up here was kind of almost like was skinned out.
Did he ever get aggressive with you?
Tonka toys, like the trucks and the G.I. Joes, he would rip the G.I. Joe's head off and just rip them apart and just tear them up. That was it with that.
Okay, let me ask you this. How far were you away from this from these people?
Yeah, that was my question.
Probably 20 minutes away, walking distance from my house on the country road.
And so how far was the encounter from you from the creatures?
From now?
No, how far were they away from you?
How close did you get to him is what he's asking.
You mean like in front of me?
Yeah, how far were they away?
Yes, like you know, holding his hand and just touching his hair. I was able to touch his hair, and it was like a kid, just a kid that was slow or had special, you know.
So you were maybe like around 12 feet. I mean, I'm sorry, like a foot away from him, you know, since you could touch him and everything like that.
Yeah, he was real funny though about touching around his face and anywhere about his feet too. But back of his head, he didn't mind, you know, touching his head or his arms, you know, his hands. He was real funny about his anywhere else. Yes, you know, his feet. I used to want to see his feet, and he was like jerking away from me.
Let me ask you this question: if you were that close to this creature, and then you were talking about the odor, did he have any strong odor when you were that close to the creature?
Yeah, real stinky. Yeah, I used to give him soap, but he just take the soap and smell it and throw it. He would cast it. He didn't want the parts with the soap, man, or the cologne. And I had to be poured out. He smelled it. You know, he didn't like the smell. Especially when I would go in there, if I had to, you know, take a wheel inside the, you know, use the bathroom inside the car or something before I had to go. He didn't like that. He didn't like the smell of my scent. For some reason, my scent was offensive to him. I guess you could say, you know. When I first seen him, he was looking at me like this, like.
Now let me ask you this: how many? Let's say, for example, that how many times did you have interaction with this creature?
Almost every day I wasn't in school, summer school, but when school was out for the summer, I would go to the junkyard and spend the whole day down there playing with him and trying to talk to him, and he would just sit there and look at the sky. And when jets go by, is when he would be moving, you know.
Right.
There was a lot of noise, like car noises or sirens or an airplane going by or something or a helicopter. He would be wanting to, you know, I guess walk some, you know, down the railroad track, something like that. He would never go moving on the move when it was quiet. He didn't like nobody knowing he was in this. He always said he slept on the third car, like 3 cars piled up, and he was on the third one to the top. a big old Lincoln Continental car, and that's where he made his bed at.
Did he?
Really?
He had old rags and newspapers and whatever trash that we call trash, old paper cups and things in there. And he was like, I guess his toys are in his house, you know, and had animal bones up there. He took the animal bones and I know he would take his hair and go like this with his hair, you know. He would do a twist with his hair like this, you know, and put it with mud, you know. So I do remember that. And he didn't like wearing clothes. I took some clothes out there and he just ripped them off and just put them in the car, you know, laid them on the little seat where he laid on. He wanted to sleep on them, but he didn't like that smell for some reason. The human smell and urine smell was real, like his odor it was to me. And I asked, like, oh, you stinking? He's like, I love you, know. I'm like, okay. So,
But that's a good question that they asked here. Did you ever see the parents? Did you ever see?
I didn't never see nothing. You know, I hear noises before when I moved there, but I don't know. It seems like for a while I didn't hear nothing for a year or so, and that's when later on, I think maybe it was about 2 or 3 years when I found him at the junkyard with the railroad tracks over there. And then I was wondering why all these snakes. I find these snakes, and the snakes will be laying on their backs with their heads twisted off. Yeah.
Like poisonous snakes?
Yeah. Copperheads and one of my books of copperheads, he would take them and I found one more time when it was a poison, it was a hawk-nosed snake. He wanted to play dead and he twisted the head would be twisted. He didn't like snakes either.
Wow. Did he walk funny?
Yeah, kind of like the way his legs was different than mine. His legs were like I walk flat, you know what I mean? He walked like on his toes, almost like you could say. Almost like he's walking on his toes, like this, with his feet, you know.
Did
He's walking on coals when he walked.
Okay, but did that look funny to you, especially looking back at it now? Did it look like a sort of a gliding motion or something?
Yeah, it was. He was fast too. I guess he was fast. How old he was? He was probably, I would say, maybe 10 or 15 years old. Maybe he was. I know he was older than I was, but he was young as like a teenager maybe.
Kelly, do you think that Sasquatch compared to us, do you think their ages are similar to ours as far as
he's real old and ancient? I think they buried their dead, but he buried his stool, his urine. He would bury his food. Like I bring him. One time I brought him a live chicken, he just ripped it apart, took it home and put it in there, you know. And I'm like, wow.
Wow.
Especially with sweets, anything like honey buns, pies, candy bars. He didn't really like chocolate. Chocolate would hype him up, but sugar. But he loved it like pies and honey buns. He craved them.
Did he seem like very, like extremely athletic for his height, age?
Yeah, you see him no time grab up on tree trunks and swing up there. And yeah, he was very. That's why I see a lot of people on these Bigfoot shows. People be looking up in the trees, and they do want to. He used to go in the trees a lot, and he would always want a tree before he would move. He'd go top of the trees and these big old pine trees, and he would just scale them, you know. And before he went any further, he would make sure he climbed the tree to look around. I guess to see ferns. I don't know who was around or whatever. He always would climb trees before he would move too.
Now, was anyone else around, or did anyone else see or witness this as well?
No, only one I think he knew about it was this old.
I got a question to ask you. How long, let's say during the day, was your interactions with him?
Wow. I guess as soon as I get up to before it got dark, he used to catch fire. I used to catch fire lightning bugs, put them in a jar, and he would like to keep them up there in the car at night. I don't know why he loved lightning bugs. You know, look at lightning bugs and swat at them and stuff. He loved things like he was very attuned to nature, you could say. The birds always, like he knew what the animals, the birds were saying, like the talk or whatever. And he would, you know, he probably would remember me if he saw me. I think he would remember me because I call him Stinky. I call him Stinky. I want to say, I know he's Rocco. And he, for some reason, I don't know, Stinky was better. So I guess it's something more American or English. I don't know. But he was my friend for about 3 years.
For 3 years. Now, let me ask you this. When you say he's your friend for 3 years, out of those 3 years, did you have an everyday encounter with this individual?
Yes, I did. I really did. I tried to, I would sit there and he just liked to hear me talk. He would like to hear me talk when I played up in the radio sometimes. I used to play the album, the first Toto album. I played that, Toto, and I play Van Halen, I think it was Diver Down or something. And I played different cassette tapes on the boombox, and he liked it. He liked it, especially like the hard rock metal I played, like Aerosmith. He liked it that. I don't know why, but he liked it like Dream On. So I played the music, and he'd sit there, and I just,
Awesome.
always as a kid, I used to get beat up because I used to like to talk a lot. So he would just sit there and listen to me and just, stare off in the face while I was talking. And if I was quiet, he'd be, hit me, want me to talk. So,
Wow.
Apparently, he didn't understand some of the words after a while. I guess maybe the second year, I'd be like, where were you at, And he'd be like this, point a certain way. I don't understand where he said he was at, but, I guess somewhere. He was like, so.
Gerald's asking, did he ever take on any human traits after spending so much time with you?
He knew how to open a soda can. He knew how to take the honey buns out the wrapper. He started wanting toilet paper, but just to wipe his face with. What else would he do? He knew about fire too. I have to say that he knew about fire with the wood and I think it was flint or rock or something. He would take and rub it together, and I think it was wood, and rub it together and make a fire with it. He did do that.
He made a fire.
Mm-hmm. Made a spark out of some, this doing like this, with his hand. Yeah, very smart. Couldn't talk, but he was intelligent. He wasn't some dumb animal, which I don't think animals are dumb anyway, but he was intelligent.
Did you teach him how to do that?
No, not the fire, no. I was cold out there one day, and it's like probably December. It wasn't snowing enough, but it's cold. And he knew I was cold. I had my jacket. He just sat there and did his thing and took some grass over there.
Now let me ask you this: after he made the fire and built the fire, was he there? Did he bring wood to the fire? Did he?
He just grab dry grass and fire straw and put it on there. That's what he would use. And then after the fire was warm, then he put like pieces of wood, little small, he would put the big and small pieces on there, make enough just to get a little warm, I guess. And he used to love to play with sticks too. He would take sticks. He had a whole collection of sticks of all different, like, being up and stuff, and he would like more toys, I guess. So I knew this personally. Only thing he didn't like pizzas and hamburgers and stuff like that. He didn't like greasy meat, so he didn't like them. He liked the fruit, and he liked the fish. And so on occasion, there'd be animal bones in there, some animal he would kill and eat. But I guess it'd be like a dog or a cat or something, maybe a cat.
When you left to go home, did he ever follow you or try to follow you?
Never. He would never leave the junkyard unless it was getting close to dark or a stormy day. He would go out, or a lot of ways going on over trains and stuff. He would always stay in the junkyard. As far as I know, when I was there, he would mess around with his fingers, with his long fingers and stuff, or I guess in the sand, with dirt or whatever. He would always do these things. I don't know what it was. He was showing me, but he would always scribble this stuff on the sand, on the dirt.
Back when you had this interaction, did by any chance, the thought, I'm only thinking of this because the thoughts running through my mind, but did you ever have access to a camera or thought about trying to take pictures with him or of him?
I didn't have cameras back then. Only thing you have, I think I had access to, was those little cheap cameras in the store, but I'm like 9, 10, 11 years old. I won't think about nothing like that. I just had a friend that, I went to see. I told my mom and daddy come out here with some time. I said, I'm bring my mom and daddy here to see you. He was like, He didn't say yay or nay, but he was stressed it. I guess it was more or less he didn't like nobody around. He didn't like other people. For some reason, he took on to me.
So you feel that basically this juvie, this young Sasquatch, it understood you.
Yeah, after a while, he would have these like, Chinese. You watch the old kung fu movies and they be talking, but it be real fast and then it never matches what they're saying.
Let me ask you this question here. So you basically went to the junkyard quite a bit, and did your parents ever check up on you, or?
My parents knew I was out there. They knew I was pretty much a country boy, and I loved. I was like, hey, we was junior, country boy can't survive. I always go in the river and make trot lines. They knew I was safe because I knew about the woods and the animals, and I respected the land and the animals. Even when I go fishing or hunting with my dad, I always get thanks for the animals for food. I never kill for sport or fish for sport. So they knew I was pretty adaptable on my own out there. Besides getting local kids sometimes, catching me down the road walking and trying to feather me or beat me up. Other than that, no.
Let me ask you this. You said earlier that that you told your friends about seeing this little creature. Have you ever brought them to that to actually see them? To actually see them?
With my friends?
Yes.
What now?
No. Let's say, for example, when you were younger, did you ever bring your kids over there to say, "Hey"?
No, never. I never thought about that. He didn't like other people and things. He was always. I went to see him and play with him, and I never did tell him that. I didn't tell other than the school counselor. He said sometimes while I was coming in smelling like roadkill, I said I was playing with Stinky, my friend. I said it looks like chocolate playing the lost, and she was sitting there puzzling. And next thing I know, the police come in there, and who else was it? They called somebody. The state people come or something, wildlife people, and I told them about it, and that was right, and they looking at each other. And now looking back, I knew they probably knew what I was talking about, but I didn't know as a kid that what I was doing. I feel kind of bad about it now, but as a kid, I just wanted to tell the world about my little friend and in the world. I didn't know about Bigfoot and even stuff like that. So,
wow, that's a lot to unpack there, Pat. So I don't even know where to start. Let's start about the first time you heard this. Now that was obviously over the course of maybe a couple of different interviews and kind of all spliced together. The first time you heard the story, like what were you thinking and what was sticking out in your mind as you were hearing Kelly recount this?
Yeah, well, yeah, I had no idea it was coming. The only heads up I got was Daniel wanted me to come on the show, and he kind of said, and this guy Kelly's going to be there. I don't know. I don't know what's up with this guy. It might be interesting. That's it. And so Kelly just starts very casually saying, I had a relationship when I was, 9, 10 years old with the Sasquatch. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was some kind of wild kid. And yeah. And I'm like, whoa, where's this going? And it was really, like I said before, when he started describing the facial features that are exactly the same as this drawing that, again, me and my buddy Ernie did about 7 or 8 years ago for an eyewitness. And so that really got me going. He had my full attention then, and so I just heard him out. Now, looking back at it, it's what's interesting to me is, and I'm sure, like, since you've been doing this, Brian, you've heard a lot of encounter stories, right? And the minutia of everything that Kelly is talking about is almost like 100 different encounter stories combined, right? A little piece of minutia from this one, a little piece from that one, and it's all in one story, which is kind of crazy. And I guess it should be if he actually spent that much time around a younger Bigfoot.
Yeah, as I was going back through this and listening, as we were listening to him recount his story, I was making notes and I jotted some things down that stuck out to me the second and third time around of hearing this that didn't really stick out in the beginning. So when he very first starts recounting the story, he's talking about people in his family or other people talking about Sasquatches in the area, hearing loud screams and howls, kids disappearing, and he even alludes to somebody, these folks shooting and killing whatever was taking the kids. I found that very interesting because it sort of set the stage for there being a pattern of behavior. These other people are experiencing things. Did you pick up on that? And was that one of the things that kind of stuck out to you, that this guy may be telling the truth?
Not not at the time. Because that was the very beginning. Like, that was one of the first things he said. And so I actually didn't catch any of that, like, as it was happening in real time during that conversation. It was only later when I went to clip clip the his talking about it and make those clips. It was only then that I caught that. Yeah, that one little thing where he says a couple of kids were carried off, and then he kind of says something about shooting their, like shooting whatever was responsible. And I don't know what to make of that, honestly. That was such a quick, weird thing to say. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I'm not sure what to make of that.
And some of the other things that he gets into is the way that he describes Stinky, as he called him, speaking in the language. I literally was, before we hopped on today, I was doing the edit on a recent interview I did with Scott Nelson, the crypto linguist, who spent time dissecting and diving into the Sierra sounds. And that's one of the things that Scott and I went over and over in his interview was the first time he heard the Sierra sounds, he was very convinced that these things were speaking in some sort of a language. And if you listen closely to the way that Kelly describes the way that Stinky is vocalizing to him, it's very much like many of the clips that you'll hear in the audio that I did during the interview with Scott Nelson from the Sierra sounds. It's almost identical to what people have come to know as the samurai chatter, and then this back and forth, what Scott believes to be a male and a female Sasquatch. That was one of the things that stuck out to me. What were your thoughts on the language and them spending so much time together that he actually believed Stinky was able to understand what he was saying to him, even though he didn't understand what Stinky was saying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that definitely was fascinating. Very fascinating thought, which a lot of these things he describes are. But it's funny, his sort of impersonation of how Stinky. Now, if I had to bet money, or if you put a gun to my head, I would say Kelly had never heard the Sierra sounds. Kelly didn't really participate in the Bigfoot world that much. I don't know how he came across Daniel and befriended him on Facebook, and was interested in Daniel's group, the ECBRO. But he didn't really swim the waters of the Bigfoot world too much, and yeah, if I had to guess, I'd say he never heard the Sierra sounds. But I don't know that for sure, and that knowledge is lost now anyway. So, but it was kind of interesting. His impersonation of Stinky was, almost comical, but yeah, it's definitely in that ballpark of the Sierra sounds.
Yeah, that was one of the notes that I had written down sort of in that same area when he was talking about the Kung Fu movies and what it sounded like, and how he believed that he could begin to understand at least what Kelly was saying after a couple of years. But he did mention briefly about some of the things in the Bigfoot shows when he was talking about, when you ask about the athleticism, and he was talking about Stinky being able to just pick himself up and swing on tree. He called them tree trunks, but I'm assuming he's talking about tree limbs. He does mention some of the Bigfoot shows and people looking up into the trees, and they should be, because Stinky was able to do this. I don't know if that's something you picked up on initially, but did you ever have that moment? Because the second time I heard these, I sort of picked up on that, and I started scratching my head saying, how much of this could be something that this guy's seen on television, or he's maybe heard on some of these YouTube channels or whatever? Did you ever have that moment where you thought, it's possible this guy might have heard the Sierra sounds, and he might have heard some of this stuff, and he's just sort of piecing everything, like you said, picking and choosing some of the things to add to his story. Did that ever cross your mind?
I mean, yes and no. So, so I took a skeptical approach to Kelly's story, even though it's fascinating and he had my full attention. And as I got to know him, because like I said, we after that, I connected with him on Facebook, and we started becoming friends. We started forming a fast friendship, and I liked Kelly a lot, man. He was my buddy, and I was fascinated with this story, and I'd pick his brain all the time. I showed him the drawings. We had conversations about that, and here's the thing: I tried to trip him up more than once. You know, Kelly's a smart guy, but I knew how to do some workarounds to try and, like, months later, I would ask him the same question again. He no way he remembered me asking him that question, and I never could trip him up, Brian. So I'll say that, you know, how if this was all just a creation in his head, man, that happened to him. I mean, then he fooled himself. Like, so in other words, I never really got deception from him. And as we became friends, I just never picked up on deception. So if that was all in his head, again, that happened to him, whether it happened in reality or not. So yeah, I tried. I tried to trip him up and I never could.
I think that's one of the things that is such a fine line to walk, because I had somebody reach out to me recently on Instagram, and it was after a couple of shows that I posted. Frankly, there was 2 interviews, and I'll just be honest, I wasn't going to post the interviews because I did have some doubts about these people's story, and it was sort of fantastical, and it was one of those situations where no matter what I ask, it was, oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've had a dogman encounter. Oh yeah, Bigfoot and dogman were fighting on my property, and so on and so
Right.
forth.
Yeah.
But I've always said, when it comes to these anecdotal stories that I have on my show, I don't necessarily vet people in that sense of vetting people, because there is no way to prove whether somebody had an anecdotal experience or not at the end of
Mhm.
the day. You have to present it as it is, let them tell their story the way that they tell it. And then you, as the audience, and me as the person who's listening and hosting the show, have to take away what we want and leave the rest and say, either I believe that story, I believe part of that story, or I believe that person was 100% BSing everybody. And, the guy was, he was challenging me on these people's mental health. I mean, that's basically what he came out and said was, I love your show, but these last couple of people, he didn't even name them. I just automatically assumed of who he was talking about because I had those concerns myself. You got to know they're unstable mentally, and you shouldn't put that stuff out there because you're not doing anybody any favors. And I'm like, well, you know what? I don't have a degree in mental health. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know. I can't diagnose somebody's mental health. And just because you listen to their story and you automatically assume that the way they talk or the way they tell their story, they're mentally ill, does not make that the case. Right. And when
Yeah.
I hear a story like Kelly's, it's clear to me, at least, that he seems to be very coherent. He seems to be very mentally sound. And as you said, even if these things didn't happen in reality, they happened to him in his brain. And that's sort of the way that I've approached this subject since I started this show. Was I don't mentally diagnose anybody who comes on my show. That's not part of what I do. I give people a platform to tell their stories, just like I would have Kelly. If he'd been alive today, he would be somebody I would have on my show to share his story. That's kind of why we're paying homage to him today, even though he passed away a couple of years ago. But how do you handle that? Did that ever cross your radar that this guy may just be batshit crazy and he's making this stuff up?
Well, yeah, I mean, I knew he was definitely on the spectrum. He's on some kind of spectrum. He was kind of a kid. Like, even as an adult, man, he still did kid stuff. He'd have like little toys, um, in his little apartment there, up on the shelf, like things like that. So he was kind of a adult kid, but he was smart and he was functional. Um, and I never I never got to know him well enough to dive into like his history, or I don't know his family. Like I'm not connected to any of those people. So yeah, I always kept it in check that I knew he was on some kind of spectrum, but I always balanced that with the reality of kind of his functionality seemed just fine. It's one of the things, Brian, that always fascinated me is he referenced a lot of things from the 70s, especially the music and what would have been pop culture. It's why, like Shaka from the Land of the Lost, which would have been on television at that time or near that time. Because I'm thinking he's referencing probably 77, 78, 1977 or 78. I don't think he would have really known anything about Bigfoot other than what was in pop culture, which would have been a Shaka type character, or from $6 Million Man, the Bigfoot episodes from $6 Million Man. So yeah, I mean, did that influence him? And now he's an adult spitting this out, maybe. But I'm like you, dude. I'm not a mental professional. I can't say, and I've thrown it out there to people that have some kind of skill sets in those areas, and actually never got an answer, which surprised me. But
And that's one of those things I said to the person who was reaching out to me on Instagram. He came back with, "It's just between you and I. You got to know, you were a cop for 16 years. You got to know when somebody's not stable or not." And sure, I've been on 911 calls with people face to face, and I understand that they're not stable, and I can pick up on that. But again, when you're interviewing somebody, I said to him, it's very possible that I've had people on the show, probably even recently, that said, "Hey, I was a hunter and I was out deer hunting, and this thing walked up under my deer stand and it was 25 feet away and it growled at me." That person could be absolutely 100% mentally totally out there and unstable. And just because they sound or present themselves in a way that people perceive to be mentally sound, that's just the way that people see things. But again, we're not mental health professionals, and I'm not here to diagnose anybody. So I think that's the only way you can really do it, is look at his functionality and the way that he's able to rattle off and tell his story. And he seems perfectly coherent, perfectly sound minded. And his story is what it is. There was a couple of things that I found really interesting that, again, either he had these encounters and he had this experience with this thing, or he was very well versed in some of the Bigfoot phenomenon in the community, because he talks about things that only people in the community would really talk about, like finding animals like snakes, for example. He mentioned the twisted off heads. That's one of the first things when I started talking about some of the experiences I've had here on the property that Doug Hychek said to me was, "Are you finding rabbits or snakes with the heads twisted off?" And I'm like, "No." But that's one of the things that's typically associated with a Sasquatch encounter, or even a habituation site where you're having multiple encounters with these things. I found that interesting. The other thing was the scent thing. He said that he would pee around where this thing was and it didn't like his scent. Again, if you're dealing with something that's a large primate and what I would consider to be an apex predator, that's something else that would really stick out to me as an investigator. If somebody said that, I would say, that would make me pause. Is that something that really raised your red flag to say, again, this guy's probably telling the truth?
That's not something a kid would make up. That's for sure. So again, it goes back to, well, did he make this up as an adult? Is he making it up now for our benefit? And again, after knowing him for many months, I never picked up on any deception. Now, am I an expert in that? I don't know. I'm pretty good at poker. I have my moments in this world, man. So I'm not going to claim to be an expert at, are people telling me the truth or not. But the snake thing caught some other people's attention. So I had people that didn't, flat out didn't believe him. Like, it's just too over the top. And then I had people that had some experience in the woods, and being, encounter experience, go, yeah, that snake thing, I've had that. I've had that happen, and I've seen these things, and then I've seen these snakes missing heads, like that. A lot of that stuff really hit home with people who have had encounters or been around them kind of situations, so it's a double-edged sword, man. It's all about how you approach the story. you know if you really want to believe it, it's going to be compelling. If you're too skeptical or too close-minded, then it's all BS. But Kelly was my friend, and it was a fascinating story to me. And yeah, he touched on so many points that I find it compelling, and I'd like to believe my friend.
So one of the things that stuck out to me was he's having these interactions in a junkyard of all
Yeah.
places.
hmm
Did you find that interesting that this thing, he said there was woods. If you listen closely, he talked about I think Daniel or one of the other guys in the interview asked him, did he ever see any other Sasquatches? Did he see the adults? And Kelly's answer was no, but there was always woods right on the cusp there. And he could hear things in the woods, but he never saw them. Did you ever get a sense of why this thing was hanging out in a junkyard outside of just that's where it came to play? Maybe, I don't know. I found that pretty interesting.
No, I could never really wrap my head around that, and Kelly couldn't. He never could articulate that, because again, it it was from his understanding of the world as a 9 or 10-year-old, I think. You know, so he always told this story from the perspective of a 9 or 10-year-old kid. You know, and like he said, like some of the interesting stuff to kind of go along with that. He's like, I thought it's just some wild kid. The language he used was, I thought it was a wild, retarded kid. Like he didn't, his whole claim from his point of view as a young child is that he didn't know what the heck a Bigfoot was, and it didn't seem like that. He just thought it was a wild kid, and so the junkyard thing is a bit of a head scratcher, you know. That and the fire. That's the one people go to the most, man. That's where when they listen to that story, that's where the story goes off the rails for most people, because I don't know, I guess they're expert. I guess they're a bunch of Jane Goodalls that I don't know about that study Bigfoot to the point where they know that a Bigfoot is not capable of making fire, because that's the only claim made, that maybe they're capable of it, and we don't know that. There's no knowledge either way. So I hate that people get derailed because of the fire thing, is to claim that that they're not capable of it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that came up. I actually posted today as we record this. The conversation I had with Cliff Barackman the other day was, we got into some of what he thinks these things might be. And he thinks there's some sort of Australopithecine. And we talked about tools and fashioning tools and the way that sort of differentiates certain hominids from hominoids and other great apes and things like that. Even chimpanzees have been known to not just use a stick to stick into anthill and eat ants, but they will fashion and sharpen the tips of certain things to use them for certain things that they need, right? Cracking something open or reaching something, whatever. So fire came up with that conversation with Cliff. And as far as we know, I mean, if you look back into our family tree, when fire happened for us, we were very, very, very primitive in the big scheme of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it goes back to, nobody really knows anything about Sasquatch. And if they're around people enough or have some way of seeing people make fire, or maybe they just do it on their own, who knows what they're capable of. Obviously, I wrote that down. It was one of my notes to talk about that I found very interesting. And again, it's one of those things that it's almost like the breast on Patty, as far as I'm concerned, that people point to. If you're going to fake this, why would you go to the point of putting breast on the suit And if you're Kelly and you're telling this story, why in the hell would you tell people who are in the Sasquatch community who are pretty familiar with this phenomenon? And as far as I know, I have never heard a story where people have seen these things or encountered them where they have used fire. Now, Cliff brought up I don't know if it was something he had taken or a story he was aware of where maybe they're carrying a stick that they picked up out of a fire from a campfire or something, but actually making fire is unheard of. So that was one of those things that I sort of check a box. Again, either this guy's making this up and he's taking it a little too far, or he really had this encounter with this thing.
Yeah, I don't know why you would just outright make it up for whatever attention in the moment that you're trying to get, and include something that completely derails your story. You know, I mean, I took that for what it was, and it just so casually came out of him. You know, because the question was, did Stinky ever take on any human traits from you? And then that quickly led to, I mean, he kind of went through a few things, and then all of a sudden he goes, just out of thin air, he just goes, hey, well, he could make fire. I mean, he could make fire. And then he will follow that up, and he explained why and how it happened. And he just, it came right out of his mouth, man. There was no, like he wasn't even thinking about it. It was as if it happened to him,
There's a couple of other things I wanted to touch on. And one of them was this came up recently. Somebody sent me a message, I think yesterday or the day before, asking my opinion on David Paulides coming out and saying Patty has her hair in a ponytail. Have you heard this at all? Are you familiar with him supposedly making the statement?
No. I mean, if he actually said that, I mean, I don't know what he's talking about, number one. And, I got all kinds of Paulides issues. So, yeah, I mean, like, I don't much care for him, honestly. And yeah, that could be a whole show unto itself. Which I might.
I definitely agree with that. That's something we might ought to talk about off air and make that happen. I don't know either. I haven't looked at it. I will certainly, before this airs, I will take a look into it, and I'll talk more intelligently about it in the intro of the show. But I brought it up because another interesting point, at least to me, and one of the notes that I made, was him talking about the mud baths and him never really getting wet, throwing the soap away. But he also talked about him using mud and twisting his hair.
Yep.
Almost fashioning his hair into a style of some sort. I found that very curious because, again, it's one of those little details that I've never heard in any other story that I've taken. I'm sure they're out there. People have maybe, I know they've talked about in the past. I've heard people talk about, I don't know if it was Melba Ketchum or somebody said that they had encountered Sasquatch who like braid like feathers and stuff in their hair, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I've never really heard anybody talk about that I have been aware of. At least I've taken the story or had firsthand knowledge of. What did you think about that? Did you think that was just one of those details? Did it stick out to you, or did it add any more credibility to the story as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that it added or took away. I thought it was an interesting point, and again, especially the way it just kind of came out of him. It just, however he got there, talking about this kind of led to that, and then he's, oh yeah, again, oh yeah, and he would twist his hair. Again, it seemed genuine. It seemed to just genuinely come out of him as a recall of something. And I mean, it, all the points are kind of fascinating to me. I don't know if it was in the clip or not, but I specifically remember asking him, because he said something about it would go up into the tree. Stinky would go up in the tree and look around before going on the move. And I'm like, a pine tree? And I mean, you know how the pine trees are down here in the South, man. Like they're 80 feet tall, and all the limbs are at the top. So you got 60 feet of just raw trunk with no limbs. And Kelly said that Stinky would just shimmy up a freaking Carolina pine tree and get some observations before going on the move. And I'm like, I mean, the shoe fits. We think we think Sasquatch is that agile. That we get a lot of reports of some like almost superhero agility kind of things that they do. So
One of the last things that I definitely want to touch on is something that I think may be the most important. And as you said, I will definitely link to the original video so everybody can sort of see Kelly telling his story, see your reactions. And one of the parts in this that stuck out to me was when he was talking about his feet and the way that he walked. And I sort of saw you in the video, and even now today, as we were listening back to it, you kind of perked up a little bit, which I did as well. What did you think about the way that he described? I really couldn't tell. I'd have to go back and look at the video and see if what he described, as far as with what maybe Cliff Barackman or even Meldrum would say as far as the foot was concerned. He was talking about this thing walking on its tiptoes almost. Did you see that, or at the time, or even now in retrospect, do you look back and say that's sort of in line with what we would say would be a mid-tarsal break and what we know about the possible morphology of these things and how they walk? What did you think about how you described about the way that Stinky walked when his feet were touching the ground?
Well, I can say, because I remember asking him the question because I wanted to know. And he gave me the answer that I wanted to hear. Which is because it should walk different. The answer should be it walks differently than us. It walked kind of funny. Whatever. The way he articulated walking on hot coals. And I'm still kind of trying to visualize, even when I heard it just as we played it before, I'm still kind of trying to visualize what that looks like. But the best I could tell, it was a different motion of walking that is almost like this, where the foot is reaching out and sort of propelling itself opposite, like grabbing and propelling. Not we push off. That's what we do. And they probably do too to some degree, but yeah, I still don't have a complete visual in my head of what that would be. All I have to go off is the little few details that he gave there. But he definitely said it was different. And that was important to me.
Well, is there any final word on the Kelly and Stinky story or saga that you want to leave everybody with? What was your final takeaway with the story? Where are you on it now? And is there any final words that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, like unfortunately Kelly passed. Like that was a sad moment for me personally. But I also recognize, man, if he was still around, these conversations could be had with him in a brand new way. Not so casually. All those clips came from a pretty casual show, a pretty casual conversation. And my head wasn't as in the game as it is now. I didn't have the same kind of resources back then that I do now. So on both fronts, man, I miss Kelly as a friend. Sucked that he died. And it sucks that he's not around to tell this story. So I wanted to honor him and his story, by doing the show that I did, which I turned you on to, and here we are. And really, I'm glad it's out there in the world, and I just kind of have to walk away from it because there's just nothing else to learn. I just don't see how much further it could go with him not being here. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to walk away from it again. And if anybody asks me about it, I'd be more than happy to talk about Kelly and some of the fun times we had and some of the goofy stuff that he would do in his goofy YouTube channel. He couldn't play a lick of guitar, man, but he would sit there on YouTube for hours, live streaming on YouTube, trying to play his favorite songs on guitar. I mean, like I said, he was kind of a kid, man, but I love the guy. I'll miss him. And I'm glad his story is out there in the world. That makes me feel good. So thanks for letting me be a part of his story on your show.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, man. I know it wasn't the easiest thing for you to share, and I appreciate it because I think you're doing him an honor and a service for getting his story out there to as many people as possible. So I appreciate it very much. Anything coming up on Squatch Talk you want to plug? Anything fun coming up that you got working?
Man, I'm working on all kinds of stuff, and it's just a matter, Brian, of finding the time to pull the right triggers, send the right emails, and hopefully get some things going. But I'm really wanting to focus in a much more scientific direction, at least temporarily. I love the fun conversations. I love the panel discussions, the sort of free for alls. That's fun, and I'll always have those around. But I really want to get some non-Bigfoot scientific professionals on the show to have an open, honest discussion about this topic. I think that you don't see a lot of that, again, in the Bigfoot community. And even the skeptics, I've had skeptics on my show, and I'm going to have them back on again. And I really want the researchers to step up their game and bring me some evidence, or give me something compelling to go off of, because it's just been recently way too much narrative, and that's got to stop. The narrative, Bigfoot sauce, I call it Bigfoot sauce. Researchers, they go out in the woods, and then they come report back, and they got this giant bottle of Bigfoot sauce on the table with them. I'm like, man, that's got to stop. Is this for entertainment purposes only? I mean, this is, to me, I take this very seriously. I really want to discover. I want answers, and I want to move the ball down the field.
Well said. Everybody go check out Squatch Talk. Pat, I can't thank you enough, man. Every time I get to hang out with you, I have a blast, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing Kelly and Stinky's story.
Thanks, man.
They say you don't gotta go home, but you can't stay